the first thing, Doug, I'd love to get your opinion on because, by the way, I just give a quick shout out to your podcast. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you, George.
Doug Casey's take. And what's your co-host? His name's Matt, correct?
Matt Smith.
Matt Smith. Yeah, you guys are really good together. But I listen to that quite often. And you were recently discussing how you believe Trump is a megalomaniac. And it got me thinking what my actual definition of an authoritarian is. Because, I always, in the back of my mind, I'm always trying to think about whether a politician or a central planner is an authoritarian. And obviously, we want to push back on that. But I guess my question would be, how would you define an authoritarian? And do you think Trump is an authoritarian?
Oh, yeah, he's definitely an authoritarian. But let me preface my answer by saying that I I don't support any politicians for a lot of reasons that we can talk about. But when it came to a choice between Harris and Trump, there actually was no choice
Yeah.
because Harris is actually she's actually a communist by background and by everything that she'd done. And she would have cemented the Democratic Party in office. That would have been a disaster. We'd never have gotten rid of them. So Trump was definitely the lesser of two evils. And I very much supported his idea of Doge, but Doge is a dead duck. It was a talking point. Nothing's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, I
Doge.
voted for him as well. So I don't want this to seem to the viewers as though this is kind of an anti-Trump thing. I'm just more looking at it from a philosophical standpoint. And just because I had to ask myself that question, how do I define an authoritarian? And I think you have to define what it means to you before you put someone or you label someone as that term.
Yeah, an authoritarian. Well, I guess it's a scale. At the
Yeah.
far end of the scale is a totalitarian who wants to direct you in every single area of your life, every area possible. Okay. The communists, basically. And the next step down is an authoritarian who will kind of leave you alone, except what he thinks is important. And then you got to
Right.
do what he says. And on the other end of the scale, we have an anarcho-capitalist like myself, who
Yeah.
doesn't even believe in the legitimacy of government at all. And then going, you know, towards the middle again, you have a libertarian who may believe in government, but a very limited government. So, yeah, in authoritarian, it's way on the wrong side of the scale.
But you think Trump, you would put him in that category?
Yeah, sure, sure, of course. I mean, he's got an idea, not based on any philosophical principles, but based on the seat of his pants,
Right.
what should be or shouldn't be, what's right or what's wrong. And he's willing to look, he's said this many times that he's the boss. He runs the country. I
Yeah.
think
It just
in
seems like
fact,
if you're doing something he doesn't like, then he's going to use whatever power he has to try to force you, or let's just say incentivize you to do whatever it is he wants. So as an example with Apple, he wants them to make their phones in the United States. So he's going to use whatever power he has, not to force them to do it. He's not demanding, he's not making it illegal to make phones in India or China, but he's threatening them, let's say, with 25% tariffs or whatever it is. And in my mind, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong as far as the policy, but in my mind, that's what an authoritarian would do.
well, it is. And incidentally, the policy itself is wrong. I mean, the government should have absolutely zero to do with the economy. Nothing.
Right.
I mean, the government should, of course, I don't believe in government. I don't believe in the state. Let me be more exact. I don't believe in the state as an institution. But if you're going to have a government, it should, since it is pure force, it should do nothing but protect you from force. That means a military to protect you from force outside the country, a police force to protect you from violence and force inside the country, and a court system to allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to force.
So, Doug, how, looking at the world through that lens and that ideal, how do you look at what's happening in LA or with the immigration policy? I
Hmm.
mean, I mean, how does an anarcho-capitalist look at borders and the fact that you need a passport to come into the country, and that if you do have quote unquote illegals coming in, that can cause a problem? So I guess the question would be, first and foremost, what is your view of Trump's immigration policy and what's happening in Los Angeles? And then if we could just wave a magic wand and have a perfect anarcho-capitalist world, how would the anarcho-capitalist deal with the border situation?
Well, as a practical matter, the way you solve the border situation is not have any welfare or any
Right.
benefits. No
Yeah.
Medicaid, no Medicare, no welfare, no food stamps, no free schooling, nothing.
Right.
It would be very much like the situation in the 19th century when the US had loads of immigrants, millions of immigrants, but they arrived penniless and they got nothing when they got off the boat. Okay. Why? That assures that only the best opportunity seekers come, as opposed to people that are looking for a free ride, which we're getting way too much of that today. So that would be point number one. Point number two is, how is Trump solving the situation? He's a big believer in what's known as Real ID, and he's a big supporter of Palantir Corporation. I did an article on that on internationalman.com.
Yeah. You guys
Last
talked about
week.
it on the podcast the other day. It was really good.
Yeah, thank you. And the thing is that Palantir is called Palantir because that's a word from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Palantir was a stone, a magic all-seeing stone. It could view what was in the past, everything in the present, and also the future. And Peter Thiel, when he formed Palantir, chose that name for a reason. And that's what Palantir does. It synchronizes. I mean, even today, all of these government agencies, the IRS, the DEA, there's 100 of these things. And they all have their own silos with their own information. And they exchange it, but it's clunky and hard. What Palantir is doing with its software is that it's melding and synchronizing all of these government data banks. But worse, much worse than that, it's taking everything from corporations like Amazon, the telephone companies, you name it, everything from Siri and Alexa, everything from cameras all over the US, so that it's actually going to be a real all-seeing eye
Yeah.
that they'll know everything about you and what you're doing in real time all the time. And I think that's Trump's solution to the problem, but only to
But
get the bad guys, just the
did
bad guys.
yeah,
Don't worry.
right. Did
If
you
you got
did you
nothing to
see
hide, if you got nothing to hide and you won't be able to hide anything, you got nothing to worry about.
Yeah, Doug, did you see today they just announced the Trump phone?
No, no. What is that?
Well, it's his son's supposedly, and they're announcing Trump Mobile. So it's an alternative to like AT&T or Verizon. It's basically
Mhm.
where they piggy bank on their excess capacity, like a Mint Mobile.
Uh-huh.
But this is Trump Mobile. So you can sign up, and it's according to them, it's going to be $47 a month. And the phone that's going to be made, according to them, all in the United States, is going to be $499, and they're taking $100 deposits, from what I read on the Wall Street Journal. But it just kind of, I'm not implying anything there, but if you're trying to collect all of this data, I think a really good way to do that would be having a mobile service. And sure, maybe that's not collecting data on the El Salvadorian gang members, but it's probably going to be collecting or give the government more direct access to whomever is using this service. And I think the problem there, I don't think that Trump would really, use that against Americans. But what I fear is whoever is after Trump is going to use that as a precedence. And now all of a sudden, you got a can of worms right there that you don't want to deal with. That's a very slippery slope.
That's right. Any institution the government sets up with the best intentions by, let's say, a good guy.
Yeah.
Uh, After he's out of office, the next guy takes over and he uses it any way he wants. So it's a very bad idea. This is why in the Constitution, well, there are two clauses in the Constitution, the General Welfare Clause and the what the hell's that other clause? But they're just a couple of words. And other than that, the Constitution says the government should do nothing but
Right.
protect you from
Yeah.
force and fraud.
Yeah. And let the
But the government
states,
does everything but that today.
yeah, and
In
let the
fact,
states deal with it. So what are your views on what's happening in LA right now? I mean, it seems like a very precarious situation there. And I'm not in the States. I know you're not in the state. I don't think you're in the States right now.
no, I'm in on my farm in Uruguay at the moment, and
But I
actually,
think there's a lot of these protests that are cropping up all over.
I'm loath to go back to the States at this point because who knows how this can spin out of control. And I've made a joke for years on my podcast saying I'll be happy to watch what's going on my widescreen TV from a safe and distant location, not out my front window. So
Right.
if I flew back to the States now, I'd be going to watch it out my front window, which is not a good idea.
Yeah. It's funny, Doug, is I actually use that line. I was texting Kiyosaki the other day, and he was texting me this map of where these kind of protests are happening or that were planned in the United States. I think they're happening now. And I actually used that quote, but I gave you credit for it. I gave you
Yeah.
credit for it. So
So
what?
what should be done about it?
Yeah, I mean, if
Uh,
you're a libertarian president, if you're Ron Paul, let's say, and you have this breakout in Los Angeles due to you sending in, I guess, these ICE agents that are supposed to be taking out all of the people that are here illegally. I mean, what's the due process? I mean, what would be the correct approach there?
well, apparently, and nobody really knows, these are just guesstimates. 10, 20 million people are in the US that don't have a right to be here. So they shouldn't be here.
Right.
They shouldn't have driver's licenses. And once they have a driver's license, they get the vote. And it's a real problem. It's not like these people are not like the immigrants from the 19th century, which were basically the same culture, the same religion, it was the same race. These people are actually aliens. And if you import 100 million Nigerians to the US, and they could do that easily because there are 200 million people in Nigeria alone, it's not going to be the United States anymore. It's going to be Nigeria. So I think something has to be done about it. Why? Because the United States, or I forget about the United States, that's just another nation state. America, which is really just an idea, was special. It really was unique. It was the only country in world history that was founded on the principles of individualism and freedom and that whole nine yards. So yeah, I want to preserve it, and you just can't have these people wandering in and voting and changing the nature of the country. So I guess that's my answer. I
So
think the
how
court
do you how do you weigh the let's say the illegal alien problem with personal freedoms? Because in order to extract, let's say 100% of the people that were in the United States illegally, you would have to infringe on people's personal freedom. So what's the balancing act? Because I'm assuming that if you were able to get rid of as many people as possible that should not be in the country, then you can go back to a more laissez-faire approach when you eliminate welfare and all of the incentive structure that is probably the main reason why we have the bad guys in the United States, as opposed to the people that were coming here, at the foundation of the country, and the people that you have this filtering process, and they're the people that come here penniless, but and by the way, they risk their lives to come here, and they still do that knowing they're not going to get anything. Well, that's usually the people that you want in the country.
of
Those are the
course,
hard workers, the people that are going to produce more than they consume. So you're able to get to that point, but to get from A to B, how do you weigh, that there's a balancing act there
Well,
with personal freedom
how do we solve the problem that we have now?
without
Well,
with the least damage and infringement on people's personal freedom that creates that slippery slope for the person after Trump.
yeah, I understand. It's a danger if you create a Gestapo that is going to be asking everybody "Ihre Papiere bitte," the way the Germans
Yeah,
did in World War II. Uh, that's that's not good, and that ties back to Trump's desire for real IDs, so you know who's there and what they're doing and where they're from. Look, you jump off the top of a building, uh, you're going to have a problem when you hit the ground. So I Trump has got lots of problems, but you can't have all these people running around. Look, my friend Michael Yon, you know who he is, right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so he makes the point because he's been monitoring this for years, hanging out in the Darien Gap and so forth, that he thinks, with good reason, that many of these migrants coming to the U.S. have actually bad intentions, that they're actually an ununiformed army that
right.
can be activated when some foreign government tells them to be activated. Well, you can't have that. That would really be very inconvenient and dangerous. It would destroy the society. The next novel that I'm going to write, well, it's actually almost written now with John Hunt, is called Terrorist. And in that book, we're going to explore concepts of terrorism. I've done a lot of thinking about terrorism. And the way to overthrow American society is not so much with a war. I mean, all of the wars of the United States have been when our soldiers have gone abroad and attacked cultures in their homeland. The next war is going to be when we're attacked here, and it'll be pretty easy. A non-uniformed army can blow up electricity stations and substations, can cut down overhead power lines, can there's so much in an open society that bad actors can do, and that might happen. So yeah, these people have to go. They really have to go, and most of them, like Trump said, it's running. Yeah, there's a bunch of murderers and rapists, but a lot of them are good people. Well, it's true. A lot of them are good people, but they shouldn't have evaded the law. And I'm not a big believer in law, period. But we have a real problem on our hands. The culture is being destroyed. And the reaction, this is actions have consequences. You got a problem. Now what are you going to do to solve the problem? You can't let them stay here.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I always, I think the argument, because what you're saying right there could be an argument for closed borders, right? Because you've got this, let's just say, a covert Chinese army coming in through the Darien Gap, which I think is what Michael argues. And just on a flip of a switch, these people, if they get the call from Xi Jinping, can go ahead and cause an uprising or do whatever it is to create chaos in the United States. But that in and of itself would be the person who's a proponent of closed borders and the non-narco-capitalist approach. That would be their argument, right? So for me, it goes back to, if someone's really a bad guy, I don't care how closed the border is, they're going to get in.
Yes, they will.
They're going to get in if they're so. I
Well,
think it
that's
goes
why this
back to,
wall is a disastrous idea. I mean, the idea of putting up a wall just smacks of totalitarianism, and a
yeah,
wall that can keep people out can also keep people in.
yeah, that's
So
right.
forget
And
it.
that,
Forget
but that
about
was the
it.
argument for the Berlin Wall, as I'm sure you know.
That's
Initially, that's
exactly
how it
what.
was sold to the East Germans. It wasn't sold as a way to keep them in. It was sold as a way to keep other people out.
Yes, and all the bad things, so-called, from the West. And you mentioned the narco capitalists and the narco cartels
Mhm.
and so forth. Are they a problem? Are drugs a problem? And I'd say the answer to that is no. They talk about 100,000 people per year dying of fentanyl. Well, I'm very sorry that that happens, but fentanyl is a legitimate medical drug. Doctors use it as an anesthetic all the time. Uh, and the fact that people abuse fentanyl, just like you can abuse anything, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, cocaine, marijuana, all these things. I mean, none of these things are really, well, I do like firearms. Look, it's a question of individual responsibility. And the reason people are on opiates, which fentanyl really is because they're unhappy with their lives. They're looking to escape from their lives. You can't solve their problems, their personal psychological problems. In fact, if it was legal, it would be cheap, and the doses, you'd know what you were getting because it would be in things you buy in a pharmacy, so you know exactly the dose. So, yeah, people would get screwed up on it, but a lot less people would die unless they want to commit suicide. And it's mostly middle-aged white males that are committing suicide, I understand, with
Yeah.
fentanyl.
So the
Anyway.
bottom line is there's trade-offs there. Nothing is going to ever be a solution. You're always going to have problems with legalizing drugs. But the issue is not whether it's going to create a problem. It's that do the costs outweigh the benefits, or do the benefits outweigh the costs? Those are really the questions that I think we should be asking. And I think,
Well, yes, that's the practical question. That's quite correct. And these arguments were made during Prohibition, where they
yeah,
prohibited
right.
alcohol, and that had disastrous effects every way possible and solved no problem at all. But more than a practical question, it's a moral question. Does one group of people, people in the government or busybodies or blue noses or whoever they are, have a right to tell everybody else what they can or can't consume? That's it's a moral question. And the answer
Yeah.
is no, they don't.
Yeah. And I think that's going back to kind of this trying to think through what the border policy should be. You have to take it even further back, like you did with welfare, and say, okay, well, if we didn't have the foreign policy we have, would we have terrorists, or would we have a covert underground Chinese army potentially coming into the United States? Because let's assume that that's what they're doing. I'm in Colombia and you're in Uruguay or in Argentina, and do they really have a problem with potential terrorists coming in?
No,
I mean,
no, not to my
what?
knowledge.
Yeah,
No.
but what? So the argument that you always get there from Americans, as you know, it's because they hate our lifestyle, they hate our freedom. Okay, well, I was just hanging out with you, about a year ago in Argentina, and they've got a lot of freedom down there, Doug. And they've got just as much freedom, I think, as we do in the United States. So why doesn't everyone in the Middle East hate Argentinians? Why do they hate Americans? I think we've got to start with that question. So it goes back to, we've got a lot of problems right now that maybe you do need an authoritarian to solve. Maybe you do need that. But ideally, I think after that authoritarian solves those problems, if that's the best trade off, then we have to go back to principles.
Yeah, well, once you get an authoritarian, it's hard to get rid of him and get rid of whoever he appoints to replace him, which very often is a family member. That's the way it seems to work. You know, this general degradation of American society and culture, which has taken place, actually, things started falling apart as soon as the country was formed with the passing of the Alien and Sedition Acts back in the days of George Washington. So it's the second law of thermodynamics in action, which basically says over time, everything degrades and falls apart. That's just the way of the world. So you try to throw some sand on the slippery slope and keep that from happening for as long as possible. But nothing lasts forever, even a good thing, a unique thing like America. So, and the slippery slope got steeper and steeper, starting with the passing of the Federal Reserve under Wilson and the income tax under Wilson and World War I, which were financed by the income tax in the Federal Reserve, and then one thing after another.
Okay, so Doug, right there, you were talking about, going back to the Federal Reserve and going back to World War One, and when you're saying that, I'm thinking about the Great Depression and FDR. And I saw this statistic the other day when they took the first 100 days in office and how many executive orders the president had signed. And Trump was number one by far. Like he was almost, I can't remember exactly, but he was like, 75% more than second place. But second, third, and fourth place was FDR.
I don't
And
doubt that.
yeah, so a lot of people like to compare Trump to Reagan, but I think when this term is done, he's going to be like a FDR 2.0. I think he's going to be a lot closer to FDR than he was to Reagan. And one of the main reasons I say that is AI, because I'd love to get your take on this, but I think that AI, although over the long term, I think it's going to be wildly beneficial to society at large. I think over the short run, there's going to be a lot of disruption there that could increase the unemployment rate in the United States to, let's just say 10, 12%, even without a recession. So then the question becomes, what does a populist authoritarian do in the United States if the unemployment rate goes to 10%? And I think you just look at the 1930s and everything FDR did as your playbook right there. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. There will be cries because everybody thinks that the government is a cornucopia. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what the average guy thinks. And the average guy is a net recipient at this point, believe it or not, of government bennies. He doesn't want to have his doggy dish broken, so that they'll all be demanding for the government to do something. They think the government has magic powers of some type, and Trump will respond appropriately. He'll do something. He doesn't. He's an active guy. He's not and he's got absolutely no philosophical core, no
Yeah.
philosophical center. He's a seat of the pants, whatever seems like a good idea at the time guy. The good thing about Trump, it's funny when people listen to an interview that I do, all they hear is what they want to hear. And they say, oh, this guy's got Trump derangement syndrome. No, I don't. There's a lot of things that I like about what Trump is trying to do. But no, he's such a mishmash with no binding philosophical core that it's going to turn into a dog's breakfast. I'm afraid, yes. And as unemployment goes up and as the economy gets worse, and it is going to get much worse, and inflation is going to get much worse, unless we have a catastrophic deflation like we had in 1929, yeah, they'll do something. No, it's not going to be good. We're in for very tough times.
Do you think he'll do UBI if the
Yeah,
unemployment rate got to
basically,
that level?
God, what a disaster that's going to be. It's essentially putting everybody on welfare and making everybody beholden to the government for their $1,000 or 2,000 or however much they're going to give everybody per month. Yeah, he's quite capable of doing that, of course.
Yeah. And we just go back to FDR again. And just for the listeners, FDR implemented Social Security, implemented minimum wage, and then also, I thought kind of interestingly enough, implemented government work programs.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't put that past Trump either. If the unemployment rate gets too high, he implements some sort of retraining program that's facilitated by the government for young males to learn AI or robotics or something like that.
He'll do all kinds of things that may be a very good idea if they were done in the private sector, but he'll he'll want to micromanage it and control it. The government is going to get bigger. Look, the situation is
Yeah.
completely out of control at this point. And sure, there are some things we like about Trump, but I'm afraid under these circumstances, he's going to get out of control. And there's something else going on here. It's that these lefties, the progressives, the Antifa people, a whole group of, the Marxists that run the colleges and the entertainment industry, all these people, the whole melange of people, they all they all hate Trump.
Yeah.
And he realizes that once he's out of office, he's in big trouble unless he somehow stays in office or has JD Vance put into office. So this thing is going to be ugly. And if he gets into a war with Iran, and of course, it's like he's a schizophrenic, where we back Israel. Israel's our friend, our best ally. And no, we're back and forth and back and forth. It's actually psychotic. And he thinks he's a great negotiator, but you can't negotiate. Other people don't want to negotiate with you if you're constantly doubling back on what you said
Yeah.
and doing the opposite. That's not smart. That's stupid. I mean, it's the type of thing that I don't doubt there are people around the government that are thinking we've got to activate, what is it, the 20, which amendment that allows you to take a president out of office if he's mentally unfit or physically unfit, which they should have used that with Biden, if anything. But
Yeah, that's definitely true. But it's funny, Doug, because on my videos, I'll have people in the comments, give me a thumbs down or something like that, because they'll say in the exact same video, but not just the same video, but the exact same line in the video. Some people will give me a thumbs down or a negative comment because they say, I love Trump. And then other people for the exact same line in the exact same video will give me a negative comment because they say, I hate Trump. And it's like
yeah,
for the exact same line, I'm like,
they
well,
they just hear what
you just can't win.
they just hear what they want to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
And people don't understand that your real enemy isn't Trump or Biden, it's the state
That's
itself.
right.
Your real enemy is not Trump or
Yeah.
Biden or anybody else. Your real enemy is the state itself as an institution.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that takes us back to the concept of principles. And, I always tell people the story. In fact, I was talking to Rick. We were at my event last month in Orlando. And one of the things we were joking about with some of the people that were at the event is your appearances on Phil Donahue. And he was also talking about when you guys met with I think the finance minister for Cuba or something like that. But we were making jokes about how you've often seemed to relish being kind of the bad guy or having a contrarian opinion to the point of people actually booing you on Phil Donahue. But I think that's because you always start from a standpoint of principles. And if you're a principled person, at times you're going to be loved, but at times you're going to be hated. And I think if you aspire to be like Doug Casey or someone that starts from a standpoint of principles, you have to accept that. You just have to be okay with at certain times people not liking you.
Yes, well, there have been so many speeches where I've given where the audience has booed me, and it doesn't bother me at all because I'm saying things that I'm hoping to shock people with. It's not good rhetoric. Good rhetoric is to say things in a way that it gently convinces people of things. Okay, that's fine. And some people do that. Like you're good at that type of thing. But my approach is generally to feel that the public as a group are donkeys. And what you do is if you have a recalcitrant donkey, is you have to hit it between the eyes with the 2x4 to get its attention. And then you can talk to it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One of the things I remember extremely well was when COVID first broke out. Back then we didn't know what the heck was going on. You didn't know how bad it was going to be. And especially me doing videos almost every single day and doing the podcast, people look to you for advice. So I remember staying up quite late at night and getting some sleepless nights. And, how am I going to approach this? And my default, thank goodness, was just principles. And my main principle there was however bad this is, the government shouldn't be involved. The government should have the ability or the responsibility to inform us. But at the end of the day, it's got to be up to the individual to determine whether or not they're going to take their kid to school, whether or not that teacher is going to give the class, and whether or not you're going to open your business. And, looking back in hindsight, that was definitely the correct approach. And I think that, if more Americans would take that approach in their everyday life, I think that, the United States might go back to being America.
Yeah, well, it's going to be hard to retro rock to that degree. But the key, of course, is for everyone to take personal responsibility and not to look to Big Brother to kiss everything and make it better. But I think we're probably advanced or degraded below that in our society. Like I said, the second law of thermodynamics, everything winds down over time. So, look, the way I see it, what's likely to happen, I don't know what the time frame for this is going to be, but the US geographically is going to break up into smaller entities because you can't put together people that actually hate each other and expect them to live peaceably, especially when all the goodies are dispensed from Washington, D.C. It's whoever gets control of the apparatus of the state rewards its group to the
Right.
detriment of other groups. And that's what's happened. The US has turned from a unique culture into a multicultural domestic empire at this point. I mean, an empire internationally, all around the world, but a domestic empire as well. Is it beyond reform? Well, not until we go through a crisis. And I don't know what's going to emerge from the other end of the crisis. The good news is the US is better off than Europe. I mean, Europe is slowly descending into the muck, no question about that. And it's better off than Africa because if the trillions of foreign aid that are flowing into Africa to keep keep its population expanding stop, they're going to go into a population collapse with wars all over that continent. That's not going to be good. So yeah, we're better off than a lot of places here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's for sure. Have you ever seen this degree of tribalism, political tribalism in the United States? I mean, you're someone that kind of has been watching this stuff closely going back to the 1960s or so. And so there's always been Republicans and Democrats. And I remember the 1980s and the early 90s growing up, you would have, I don't know if I ever saw any of the Reagan debates, but I think I might have seen it with Mondale. I might have gotten some clips on that. But then you had, Bush Sr., and he was kind of plain vanilla. And the guy, I forgot the guys he was up against, but it didn't feel like back then. Maybe it was just because I was a kid, but it didn't feel like back then that people just literally hated each other and wanted the other group to die. And
Yeah.
obviously I'm talking about certain percentages within the Democrats and the Republicans, but
Yeah.
it's getting to the point where it's almost that extreme right now. So what's your view on, has it gotten that much worse, or was I just looking at it through a different lens?
Yeah, it seems to me it's much more visceral than it was back then. Now, the last time it was similar to what things are today was during the late 60s and the early 70s. This was the time of the hippies and the yippies and the SDS and blacks burning down the cities and all this type of stuff. And I lived through that stuff, really. I mean, I remember in Washington, D.C., I mean, there were several times when I'd go out with a girlfriend on a Friday night and we would smell the tear gas in the air and there would be kids running around breaking windows. I mean, this actually, this is all true. This stuff happened. People don't remember, but it's a fact that during that 5 year period, more or less, in between the say 67 and 72, that area, there were about 4,000 bombings in the U.S. That's a lot.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, look it up, like they say.
So how was it
So,
different back then? Because with that, we transitioned from the late 60s, early 70s
yeah.
into the 1980s and
It wasn't, it
1990s,
wasn't,
which
it
weren't
wasn't
that
as
bad.
it wasn't as widespread. The
Okay.
culture class was mostly between the students and other leftists. The society itself was much, listen, we were just emerging from the days of early Beach Boys songs and Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, and kind of maybe an uptight society, but a nice one. So that things are different now, where the country is much, much more politicized than it was back then, much more.
Yeah, and
So
it
this
seems it's
kind
on
of,
edge as well. And
yeah,
my one of my former business partners before I retired, he had one of the greatest sayings, and it was so simple, but it was so profound. And it was when we were dealing with employees that, were having an issue. He would always say, it's never about what it's about. Meaning it's not about what the employee is telling you it's probably some underlying issue where if you're able to sit them down for an hour and talk to them, they're going to open up and tell you what's really going on. And it seems like what's happening with these ICE protests or what happened with George Floyd. I understand that they're saying that it's about George Floyd or immigration, but I think if you really got down to the nuts and bolts, it's not about what it's about. It's about the fact that people can't afford to put food on the table. It's about the fact that there's people don't think they have upward mobility when it comes to income, and it's all about all these underlying issues that have been brewing for decades. And it just so happens that it surfaces, and the excuse is George Floyd. But if the economy, as an example, is doing better, then you probably wouldn't have that issue, even if you had a George Floyd incident.
you're quite correct, George. That's exactly right. Because back in the 60s, well, first of all, let's take automobiles. If you bought a car, you generally save up and buy it with cash. But then
Yeah,
there was financing available for 2 years. But then it became 3-year financing, 5-year, 7-year financing. And then when you could no longer, now it's leased, where instead of having a small asset to start with, you have an immediate liability to start with.
yeah,
And that's happened throughout society. It's happened not just with cars, but with houses and everything else. And the standard of living of the US has been financed by debt. And something is going to happen to all that debt at some point.
Doug, back in the 60s and 70s, did they have the 30-year mortgage, 30-year fixed rate mortgage back then, or did that happen in the,
Yes, yes, they did.
but at least back then it was still like the 20% down payment, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. It was, but you got to remember, if you go back further in time, houses were paid for in cash, and then there was a 5-year mortgage, and eventually it became a 30-year mortgage. But even in the 60s, you could buy a nice house in a nice neighborhood. I remember the prices because I heard my parents talking about them. 30,000 bucks, nice house, nice neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
That's unbelievable. Of course, the dollar has lost 90% of its value since the 60s. I'd forget
Yeah.
about the government figures, whatever they are. It's really lost about 90% of its value just since then.
Yeah. So now, Doug, kind of switching the conversation more into the economy and in investing. Uh, One of the things that I first attracted me to your content way back when I retired, this had been like 2012, 13 or so, was the idea of crisis investing. And so, what's on your radar right now as far as countries that look interesting from a standpoint of crisis investing? And then I want to ask you if you think we'll get to a point where the United States might fit into that category that could be an interesting investment from a standpoint of crisis investing.
Well, I've always been oriented towards adventure and excitement, quite frankly. And for years, I've counseled young men that if they want to make their way in the world, to, for instance, go to Africa, where you're going to be as different from anybody else as you can get. And you don't want to stay. I don't know if I'm answering the question directly or not, but for a young man, and I'm talking to young men today because I'm not a young woman, so I can't speak for what they really want. And of course, this is another thing that's going on is the sexes seem to have been parting ways with each other.
Well,
Where
in the
in a way,
United States, it looks like everyone wants to swap. Like the guys try to be more like women, and the women try to be more like guys.
yeah, and in a way, that's part of them, and another part of them fear or hate the other sex. So
Yeah.
this is very, 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 very dangerous. But talking to young men, don't stay wherever you are and wherever you grew up. Yes, I know it's comfortable. You got friends there, you know things there, but you have to strike out. And I'd say strike out to a place where you can bring something new and different to the party. I've always liked Africa because if you go there, you're going to have more knowledge, more information, more connections, more money, more experience than any of the locals, which means that puts you on an uneven slope on the high
Yeah.
end of it. You're in a position to meet anybody. So Africa, regardless of the fact that Africa is going to be a war zone in the future, that's still the place to go. That's where the opportunity is. That's real crisis investing. What am I doing right now? Where do I see it? Look, I've always had a specialty in mining stocks. Mining is the most stupid area of the market to get involved in for many reasons. It's a 19th century choo-choo train business where all the capital's up front. It's risky. Everybody hates you. Okay, terrible business, terrible, horrible business. But the good news about mining is it's necessary and it's volatile. And right now, mining stocks are relative to everything else. I'd say, I think I'm being accurate, at their cheapest level in history. And I've been playing with them for 50 years. So if you want to speculate, you don't invest in mining stocks, incidentally, you speculate in them, two different things. I do mining stocks. I know you're familiar with them too. What else? Well, things come and go, but that's where I draw people's attention to. And I've been saying for many years, buy gold and do your saving with gold. I've been saving with gold for the last 50 years, and I've never sold any because you don't want to dig into your savings if you don't have to.
Right.
But now with gold at 3,400 or whatever it is today, it's not the same thing even to save with as it was even a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because the price of gold has gone up to a level where it's not a bargain anymore. But still, it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. So even at 3,400, yeah, do your saving with gold.
Do you think crypto has taken some of the capital away from the gold miners? So, and what the reason I say that is because on my channel, I've been calling it like the catch up trade, where you
Yeah,
usually have gold that moves first. Everyone knows that. And then usually the miners in silver
yeah.
catch up to it and then exceed the percentage increase that you have in gold. But that was kind of one of the things that I've been contemplating is that as applicable as it has been in the past due to the alternative volatility in crypto?
Yeah, I was a relatively, I was always philosophically friendly towards Bitcoin, but I was a late adopter of it. I only got into it in 2017, but that was early enough. Um, and there's a good argument that can be made that crypto will move into the same space that gold is as an actual money, as a financial asset. So I'm favorably inclined towards crypto, although at what is it, 100 or 110, whatever it is today, it's not the same thing as it was at 10,000 and or even 100.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all a matter of price. But the question is for the average guy or the sophisticated guy, where are you going to go? The stock market is at an all-time high. I'm not interested in it for a lot of reasons if we talked about stocks. The real estate market at an all-time high. I'm not interested. Real estate's been very good to me, as I know it's been good to you. But it's not the same it's not the same thing as it was a while ago, and it floats on a sea of debt. And I think famous last words, interest rates are headed up, way, way up. And that's not going to be good for real estate. So where else can you go? No stocks, no bonds, no real estate. I mean, where are you going to hide? And meanwhile, the dollar is being inflated out of existence. And if you live in third world countries a lot, which I have, you find the reason why the average guy doesn't get ahead is because he can't save. You can't save the Argentine peso. I mean, you put it in the bank, and either the bank goes bust or interest can't keep up with the depreciation of the currency. So you can't get ahead. Doesn't matter if you produce more than you consume and save the difference. Save it in currency, which is what naturally people do. You know, it's like throwing money down a well. So this is the problem, and this is happening in the US. If you can't save the dollar, how are you going to get ahead? How are you going to build capital? Well,
Yeah. I
of
think the
course,
big problem there is your expenses are denominated in dollars. Not you, but the Americans, obviously, their
yeah,
expenses are denominated in dollars. So for them not to have FX risk, they ideally would go into a dollar denominated asset. And to your point, every single dollar denominated asset is not cheap. It's not
yeah.
cheap right now. So what on earth do you do? What about foreign real estate, Doug? I know that you like to speculate on that occasionally. I know you've got a place there in Argentina. You're nice enough to invite me in there on our whole wild trip across Argentina using Bitcoin, gold, and silver. but what do you think about foreign real estate? Because I think that might be an area where that young guy that you're talking about could actually increase his purchasing power and have a chance and buy something that's cheap. The key there that I found is you got to be a local expert. If you're not a local expert, you're going to most likely lose money because you're going to pay gringo prices and
Yeah.
the whole rest of the horror stories that we've all heard.
Well, that's all true. Looking at it from a 30,000-foot view, you can tell, looking at the different countries of the world, I've been to 155 countries, lived in about a dozen, I guess, at this point. So you can get a grip on what's cheap and what's expensive around the
Yeah.
world when you look at the whole world. All right, so that's important, but you're also quite correct. Once you get that big view, you got to know the local market for the reasons that you pointed out. So it's not easy, but if you get some capital, you got to put that capital someplace where it will at least not dry up and blow away. And real estate is good for that, unleveraged real estate.
Yeah. What do you think if I had to give you the choice between investing in real estate right now in Venezuela, like Margarita Island as an example, or
And that's where I
Argentina?
go. Yeah.
Where what do you think? Venezuela or Argentina?
I've been to Venezuela probably 4 or 5 times over the years, but not recently. So I don't know what the prices really are.
Yeah.
Uh, Whether we're talking about someplace in Caracas or a farm outside, other problems, or Margarita Island, different again. So I don't know. I can't speak to that, but I will say this about Argentina. It's that although prices of retail stuff, cab rides, restaurant meals, this type of thing, have gone up a lot in Argentina over the last 6 months to a year.
In
They're
dollar
almost,
terms. In dollar terms or
yes,
peso terms?
but both, they're almost at US levels. It used to be everything was free in Argentina. It was so cheap. Now it's not
Yeah.
anymore. But real estate prices have not moved, oddly, the way retail prices have. So it's a tremendous bargain. And I don't know if I said this when we were on the show before, but I use my apartment in BA as an indicator. When I bought that apartment, it's 5,000 square feet in the best part of town, nice apartment with, 15-foot ceilings and this kind of thing. I paid $950,000 for it, cash. It's a cash market in Argentina. No
Yeah.
mortgages,
Yeah.
cash, which automatically makes the prices real. And here we are. We're 17 years later. And if I wanted to sell it tomorrow morning to get a cash offer, uh, I could get maybe 1.3, which means in real terms, I've lost money, even though it was a super bargain then. And to replace that apartment on the Upper East Side of New York, which would be the equivalent thing, it
Yeah.
would be $20 million, not 1.3, 20 million.
But I
So
think there's a very strong argument for Argentinian real estate from a standpoint of the banking system now is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is becoming actually functional to where it
yes,
actually has a banking system. And where I'm going with that is to your point, and it's very similar, especially when I first got to Medellin in 2014. It's all cash. I mean, like 95% of the people that own a property own it outright. There is no mortgage. And that's obviously common in an area that's prone to inflation because it's not prudent for the banks to lend. But now with Milei coming in and doing what he's done to reduce the consumer price inflation, then you've got the banks all of a sudden now they can go back to banking and actually lending loans and creating mortgages. So I think you could have a wave of debt coming into, or leverage, let's say mortgages coming into the Argentinian market that could prop up those real estate prices, or not just prop them up, but get them really accelerating quite rapidly.
you're quite correct. Not only that, but I suspect we're going to have thousands of rich Europeans and rich North Americans that are going to pile into Argentina and Uruguay because they want to get out of Europe for
Mm,
sure, and
yeah.
also North America. That's going to drive things up. The fact that foreign exchange controls have basically been dropped from Argentina, it's becoming a real country. And Milei is still, to the best of his ability, firing government employees, getting rid of regulations. The big test is going to be at the next elections when where his people can actually pass laws and change the laws. Argentina is structured a lot, their government's structured a lot like the US government. And he's been doing most of what he's been doing by executive orders. But to
Mm.
make a real lasting difference, you've got to change the law. And for that, you need the legislature. And I think he'll do it. So,
When are those
Argentina,
elections, Doug?
let's see, when was Milei elected? I think they're going to be later this year,
So I think like they're the
right?
equivalent of the midterms. Is that?
Yeah, yeah, every 2 years, right? Yeah. So if they get rid of the rest of the Peronists and he captures the Congress, yeah, they're going to overturn the rest of this, and I think Argentina will really boom at that point
Mm.
for all
It's
kinds of
interesting.
reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting you took it that direction, or I've never thought of it through that angle as far as Europeans trying to get the hell out of Dodge. But you look at Dubai, and Dubai has just exploded over the last, call it 5 years. And it's a result of the exact same thing. It's not just Europeans, but Russians and the Ukrainians that could get out and everyone else. They're all just kind of filtering down into Dubai because it's kind of a safe haven, still has some rule of law, or in fact, good rule of law, and it has all of the advantages that we know of. But now that release valve could be directed toward Argentina. That's something I had never thought of.
Well, yes, and it's amazing how quickly things change because, the first time I went to mainland China, I lived in Hong Kong for 10 years actually. But the first time I went to mainland China, when I arrived in Beijing airport, that airport at Beijing was just a little larger than the airport in Aspen, Colorado, where I was
Mm,
living. And when
wow.
I drove into Beijing, I took a cab in from the airport to downtown Beijing. This is the truth. It was a 2 lane or maybe a 3 lane highway, and you could still see farmers with oxes plowing fields. This is unbelievable to hear this because it's a different world. It's a different world. It's changed so rapidly in that time. So things can change really, really. And Dubai, first time I landed in Dubai, I didn't get out and go anywhere. Their airport was just, it was nothing. It was just like one big waiting room. It was crappy. It was nothing. It was a tiny little
What
thing.
what year was that,
Now
Doug?
it's one of the biggest airports on the planet. It's
Yeah.
huge.
What year did you first go to Dubai?
1980?
Oh, wow.
5 years ago. Wow.
Wow.
Shocking.
Hmm. Well, I think a lot of people would label that guy an authoritarian, and he did a lot of good there. So I guess ideally we would have a benevolent authoritarian, going back to Trump, if that's not an oxymoron. It's just, again, we go back to how important it is to look at trade-offs, because although that may be perceived to be a solution now, you're going to have some costs when eventually you get someone that has that power and authority, that is the drag is one of the people that you don't want to have that power and authority. And I think that's what people have to realize, that unfortunately, when you give especially the federal government more and more and more power, it's going to attract all the wrong people. It's going to attract people that have an insatiable lust for that power. And that the ultimate solution, I think, is to reduce the size of the federal government, especially. And then you get rid of the lobbyists. Then you get a lot better politicians. You get politicians like Ron Paul that aren't there for the power, but are there to actually be a good citizen and try to do what they can to benefit society.
Well, you're quite correct, George, but it's not a question of just reducing the size of it, because if you just prune it back, it's like pruning a tree back. That's what gardeners do, so the tree gets stronger and it'll
Yeah.
grow back. I
Yeah,
mean,
good point.
what you have to do with these government agencies is pull them up by the roots and sow the ground they grew in with Agent Orange so they can't. And that's why I was such a big fan of Doge to start with. But
Yeah.
nothing's happened from Doge. Nothing. And now that Elon Musk is gone, and he's the only person that has the stature and the bearing and the everything that it takes, it's going to go nowhere. And Trump will be setting up new agencies to do things that he thinks are good in the future. Like, well, in his last term, he set up the Space Force. Okay, that's another new bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Uh, well, this is a good bureaucracy. It's new. It's like I'm trying to think of some other things that he's done. Like, I'm all for nuclear power. Trump is all for nuclear power too. That's wonderful. But he's talking about, getting around the current stupid laws by putting it on federal land.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they don't have to deal with the national nuclear regulatory powers. So there's going to be lots of things like that. He's got this idea, doesn't he, about giving all the kids in the U.S. $1,000 IRA or something
The
like
Trump
that.
account. The Trump account.
Yeah, well, that's great. Put them on welfare at birth, in
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
what's
I
even
can see I
crazy?
can see the good possibility from it, yes. But these things get out of control, like Social Security. Hey, that seemed like a good idea at the time. You don't want old people starving in the streets.
And then it grows. Yeah.
It grows.
Going back to the Trump accounts, Doug, I'm not sure that you're aware of this, but I've done quite a bit of research on them. And what most people don't really understand about them is you automatically get one, assuming this passes. I think it's part of the BBB. But let's say you have a kid tomorrow, you don't have to register. You already get one. It's automatic. So then the question becomes, well, how do they, is this set up at your local branch of B of A, of Wells Fargo? How do they
Mhm.
know where you have an account? What are
What's the
the
answer?
mechanics
What's
here?
the answer?
The answer is you get an account with the Treasury, which is a sub account of the TGA, which is on the Fed's balance sheet. And the punchline there is that's the foundation of a CBDC. When you actually look at the mechanics of a CBDC, all it is an electronic liability of the Fed. And the reason I'm
Hmm.
saying the Fed, because it has to be centralized onto one ledger, right? And so, as an example, Gazbank, remember back in Russia, if
Yes.
you look at the history of Gazbank, they were able to implement every single thing that you can implement with a CBDC. Why? It's not that they had the technology, it's that you had everything on one ledger because there was just one bank. The central bank was the commercial bank and vice versa. So what Trump is I don't think he's doing this intentionally, but inadvertently, what you're doing with all these brand new accounts is you're basically turning them into a CBDC because they are an electronic liability. That $1,000, that's going to be bank reserves. That's going to be an electronic liability of the Fed. And the more retail accounts that you get onto the Fed's balance sheet, the more you centralize that ledger, and which gives them the power of spying on you, which gives them the
Hmm.
power of giving you a social score, which gives them the power of monitoring every single transaction, which gives them the power of issuing credit based on narrative or political desires, political goals, objectives, as opposed to issuing credit strictly on merit. So if you go back and look at Gosbank, they did all of this. They did all of it. And it's because all of the accounts were on one ledger, which Trump inadvertently has taken a step toward that with these Trump accounts.
Well, I would expect no less. And
Yeah.
and of course, if they're crediting the kids with $1,000, I don't know how they're going to handle the growth of that with interest and all this type of thing.
No, no, that what they're doing is they're only allowing you to buy stocks. That's it. They only allow you to buy stocks. So it's basically like just creating a bit. I did the math the other day, and it was like 3 to 4 billion, assuming the United States continues at the rate of new births that we had like last year. You're looking at like $3 to $4 billion a year that has to go into buying stocks.
Well,
And then if you
yeah,
know whatever you put into it, that has to go into buying stocks as well, which just props up the bubble even more.
that's great. $3 to $4 billion is created out of thin air, and then it goes into the stock market because the stock market should go down. And of course, it makes the kids feel like, wow, the government is great. It gave me something for nothing.
That's
No,
right.
it's a stupid and evil scheme, uh,
Yeah.
and it'll end badly.
All right, Doug. Well, on that positive note, buddy, tell people about the podcast. It's one of my favorites for sure, and where they can find it. And then I guess the only other thing that you're doing right now is International Man. Is that correct?
Internationalman.com. I have an article there every week. I have my YouTube channel with Matt Smith, Doug Casey's Take. And we're putting the finishing touches, John Hunt and I, no, Matt Smith and I, on a book called The Preparation, which is about exactly what a young man should do instead of going to college, which is a
Yeah.
really, going to college is a really stupid and expensive idea. And we lay out exactly, precisely what a young man should do during those 4 years of time to get a proper education, become a Renaissance man. So that book will be out, I think, in about 2 or 3 months. And then when I get back to Virginia, I'll be working with John Hunt for the fourth novel, which is Terrorist, fourth of what do you, it's not a septet. Yes, a septet, 7 novels, of which this is number 4. So I'm keeping busy.
Doug, when you come out with that next book for young men, you got to email me and let me know, and we'll get you on to promote that because I think that's going to be really, really important in today's day and age.
Oh, yes, the educational system of the US should be flushed. It's so bad.
Yeah. Well, I just think that, especially young men right now, they've really been struggling
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons over the last 10 years. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. And they need some sort of North Star. They need some sort of guidance there. And I think you're a great guy to do it. I know Matt's been actually using his kid as the experiment. And last time I heard, the kid's doing great.
Fantastic. I mean, you know, Matt's son, who's following this path, Max, the kid's unbelievable. He's great. He's going to conquer the world. Yeah, no question.
All right, Doug, we're almost out of time, buddy. Thanks. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thanks. Likewise, George.